Hello, it is March 7th, 2022. This is As the World Burns. I'm your host, Randall Burns. Today's topic is the book, The Storm Before the Calm by George Friedman. Now, George Friedman is an academic political scientist and does future studies. They're not real quantitative. They're not as extensively researched as I would like, but there are some decent points in it. Now, the first part of this book is largely devoted to a historical analysis. I think that it's not bad. I didn't see it as wildly original, but it's not bad. Two books that I would say that are worth reading that go into some of this in more detail are Albion Seed, which is a conventional historical analysis, and The 11 Nations of America by Colin Woodward, which again goes more into regional differences of contemporary America that are rooted to early waves of settlement. I've only read reviews of that. I'll include the Goodreads review, but I have not gone into that one in depth yet. But I think these two books will give you some idea of the prior art on topics that Friedman talks about. Now, the real crux of the Storm Before the Calm is in this chart, which I borrowed from Friedman's site. And the book goes into more detail on this and the historical analysis around it. You can read that in other reviews of the book, which, there's numerous. I don't really need to go into that, I think, here. I will try to do some constructive criticism of it. But bottom line, I think that Friedman did a pretty good job of picking two of the most important cycles. Now, one thing, if you notice from the chart, you notice that there is variation in the length of the cycles. And I didn't hear a lot of analysis on what are the major factors affecting the length of each cycle and what might be potential mitigating factors. That needs to go into, I think the quantitative aspect of this was a little weak. But he did a decent look at major cycles and an introduction to it that you can listen to in the car on the way to work, okay, which is what I did. And I think it's a lot better than what you're likely to listen to in mainstream news and certainly corporate media. So I give him kudos. But he's looking at a 80-year institutional cycle, which is mainly political in nature, and then a 40 to 50 or 55-year economic cycle. The piece here that I think may be original and useful is putting these two cycles together. As I'll point out later on, both cycles have been noted by other authors. Now, in a previous review, I covered the Fourth Turning by Strauss and Howe in some depth, and I'll link to my review of that book. The type of analysis you see in Strauss and Howe versus Friedman are rather different. If you like the Myers-Briggs test and Jungian psychology, you'll probably like Strauss and Howe better. If you like conventional histories, you'll probably like George Friedman better. It's really a matter of taste. I'm not trying to dictate which people will like and which they will relate to. I do think that Friedman, by looking at more than one cycle, really does add something very useful and important. And I think that he may well pick the two best cycles to look at. So, but here gives you some idea of how Strauss and Howe do their thing. The Strauss-Howe historical theory is covered in a popular movie, Generation Zero, which was actually created and directed by Stephen K. Bannon, former Trump advisor and editor of Breitbart, a pretty prominent political figure. I've done my review. I have a lot more to say about that. I do think that he politicized that work quite a bit, but he will give you the basic in a way that you can absorb while vegging and relaxing with friends or whatever. So again, you can link to that. Now, the 50-year economic cycle goes back to a Russian economist, Kondratiev. I did not hear any mention of him in the Friedman book, so I'm mentioning him here. I think Kondratiev wasn't a truly original thinker and really did a lot to popularize the idea of long major cycles. This is a kind of idealized depiction of the kondratiev waves. And the thing is that it's never entirely caught on. And I think part of the reason is here's a chart from a recent journal article discussing kondratiev cycles and the fluctuations in intensity and duration that need to be explained. It's one of those things that just never quite gets proven and never quite goes away. But I think it's something that when we're doing big forecasting that we kind of need to understand it in the context, understand like where people's prior introduction may be. Another thinker that deserves mention here is Marcia Guttentag and her husband, Paul F. Secord, who are sociologists. Marcia Guttentag was based in Harvard. She kind of held on to this work until after she died because it had some kind of controversial implications. The crux of Guttentag's analysis is that gender ratio, minor changes in gender ratio caused by fluctuations in birth rates have a major sociological and political impact. And this is demonstrated in this chart, which looks at variation in the United States, largely from birth rates. They didn't properly adjust for immigration, which is a major factor. Immigration, particularly illegal immigration, tends to be largely male, and that was not adjusted for properly in this one. There's also a real tendency in the book, I think, to look at subjective issues rather than objective ones. I mean, if you thought the 60s were utopia, then you would prefer a higher female to male gender ratio. If you think that modern day China is utopia, then you'd prefer a higher male to female ratio. And it's a subjective question. And the first question for us as scientists is just what are the effects of each and also of changes in this one. Now, again, we're doing the experiment in China and India right now where the people there are selecting for male births, and this is still unknown how it's going to play out. Okay, and I think it's one that we're too close to really analyze properly, but this is a reality of the modern world. Okay, a lot of what Friedman is talking about is political and social stability. Now, a measure of that one is the Fragile State Index. That's a contemporary international-based measure that's been going on for a while now, since 2005, and it's a well thought out metric, and I think it deserves attention in this analysis. Now, this projection does suggest that Friedman is right in his projection that the U.S. During the 2020s is destined for serious instability issues. Okay, another book relevant to this is The Changing World Order by Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio is the manager of the world's largest hedge fund, Bridgewater Associates. And a lot of his analysis is steeped in the basic goal of making someone a better financial investor on a large scale. This book is very worthwhile. Bill Gates agrees. And I really like Ray Dalio's thinking in a lot of ways. I learned a lot from his books. Now, Dalio's analysis is one, international in scope, and he goes over much longer periods of time. He can do this, quite frankly, because he has resources way beyond what all but a handful of private individuals would have. And so he can apply resources that literally like no economics or sociology department could apply to this sort of problem. And I think that he's done a good job of stepping up to the plate in a way that really few other billionaires have done in terms of filling their place. I think that looking at the second derivative on this chart, it suggests that there is some evidence of a longer cycle, and that, more importantly, that the cycle was inherited from the United Kingdom in the United States. We can also see that in this chart. Again, it's international in scope. It also shows, for example, that China may have a different cycle in play or different set of cycles in play, which I think is important, given the recent rise of China. Ray Dalio's work is first rate. I will try to make constructive criticisms of this in a future video and go into more depth, and I'll also refer back to this one as prior art that should have been incorporated also. Here's again a more U.S. centric chart in depth, which I think could evolve into work to support or refute the Friedman analysis on his cycles. It needs some more work to be tied into it, and this is really just a start, in my opinion. There are also factors I think that he leaves out. Now, the thing is that Dalio's work does incorporate mitigating factors that I think are rather important, like epidemics and death rates. Here's an example. Again, I will go into this, and it deserves its own video or perhaps even series of videos, but I think it does kind of show you where you can go with the Friedman book and where you can go from it, which is important in my opinion. Again, I'm not dissing the Friedman book. It's great for what it is. You can listen to it in the car. You can get an introduction to long-term economic and social cycles. But you're going to need more to apply this to both real forecasting and investment. It's really just a start. One huge limitation in Friedman is he's just kind of hand-waving on the issue of where these cycles came from and what factors might change them over time. I question, for example, like since in 1900, the US was 60% of British origin and most of the rest was German and Scandinavian. And now that's down to like 20% of British origin. So it's not clear to me that these cycles inherited from the UK are going to hold over time. But then there's the question of what is going to come next, which deserves its own topic. I think we may also need some information on how to evaluate these textual sources in our goals of becoming better predictors and better investors. And that's, again, a video that I'm considering, and I'll put it on my list and let people comment on that. Anyhow, this is Randall Burns signing off for today. Thank you for joining me. Please do hit the like button, hit the subscribe. Comments for future episodes are welcome. I look forward to joining you again soon.